The blade pressed cold against his throat, and in that silence between heartbeats, Father Jacques Mourad heard only the rasp of his own breathing and the whispered count of 10. The jihadist's hand trembled slightly, the knife catching the dim light filtering through the bathroom's single skylight. In that moment, suspended between this world and the next, the priest closed his eyes and cried out words that would echo through the desert prison. "Lord, have mercy on me." The blade withdrew, and footsteps fled the room, leaving him alone in the 6 by 3 meter cell that had become his monastery. Outside, beyond the locked door, the sounds of roca continued the call to prayer, the rumble of trucks, the occasional crack of distant gunfire. But inside, something had shifted in the darkness. He had stopped counting days by then, stopped marking time by anything except the rhythm of prayer. The bathroom where they kept him had become a chapel of sorts, its walls his only congregation, its silence his only choir. Every morning they came with the same question, the same threat: "Who are you?" And every morning he answered the same: "I am a Nazarene, a Christian." Then came the shouts, the curses, the promises of the knife. But Father Jacques had discovered something his captors could not understand: that faith, when stripped of everything else, becomes not weaker but more luminous, that in the deepest darkness, light finds a way to break through, that a man imprisoned can still be free. Now, as he sat against the cold tile wall, fingers moving through invisible rosary beads committed to memory, he thought not of escape but of forgiveness, not of revenge but of mercy. The man who had fled his cell moments ago, the one whose hand had shaken with the knife, that man too was someone's son, someone's brother, someone God loved despite everything. And in recognizing this, Father Jacques felt not fear but an overwhelming compassion that made no earthly sense. How could he pray for the men who beat him, who threatened him, who held him captive in this Syrian desert stronghold of the Islamic State? How could he bless those who cursed him? Yet he did, and in doing so, discovered that forgiveness was not weakness but the greatest freedom of all. Before we continue, leave your like, share our story, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Before the war consumed everything, Jacques Mourad knew the Syrian desert as a place of beauty. Born in Aleppo in 1968, to a Syriac Catholic family whose roots stretched back to the genocide of 1915, he had grown up understanding that survival meant more than simply living it, meant choosing hope when history offered only ashes. His grandfather, also named Jacques, had fled the Sappho massacres in southeastern Turkey, arriving in Syria with nothing but faith and determination to begin again. Young Jacques inherited not just his grandfather's name, but his conviction that Christians and Muslims were not enemies but neighbors, bound by geography and grace to find a way forward together. In seminary, studying theology in Lebanon, he dreamed not of grand cathedrals but of small acts of reconciliation, of building bridges where others saw only walls. He found his calling in the most unlikely place, a 6th-century monastery perched on a cliff face in the Syrian desert, Mar Musa. Led by the charismatic Italian Jesuit Paolo Dalloglio, who believed that dialogue with Islam was not optional but essential. Together, they restored the ancient stones, their hands blistered from labor, their hearts opened by prayer and conversation with Muslim neighbors who came to help. By 2000, Father Jacques was ready for his own mission, restoring the monastery of Mar Elian near the town of Caryatane, an hour into the desert from Mar Musa. The monastery had stood abandoned for decades, its walls crumbling, its courtyard overtaken by sand and silence. But Jacques saw what it could become: a place where Christians and Muslims could meet as friends, where children could play together, where the old suspicions could be replaced with understanding. For 15 years, he lived this vision daily. The monastery became a refuge for everyone: Christian families fleeing the violence that spread like wildfire across Syria after 2011, Muslim neighbors seeking shelter from the same bombs, children of both faiths playing in the courtyard while their parents shared meals and stories. Father Jacques was known in town as Sheikh Jacques, a title of respect that acknowledged his work supplying food, medicine, and water to everyone, regardless of faith. When the Syrian government's intelligence service urged the Christians of Caryatane to take up weapons, Father Jacques refused. "We follow Christ who banned the sword and died on the cross for our salvation," he told his parishioners. He believed that non-violence was not naivete, but witness, that refusing to hate was the only way to break the cycle of blood. And so the monastery remained open, its doors unlocked, a small light persisting in the gathering darkness. In the spring of 2015, ISIS swept across the desert like a storm of locusts, devouring everything in its path. Palmyra fell in May, its ancient ruins and modern residents alike swallowed by the black flags and promises of a new caliphate. Father Jacques knew they would come eventually. He had received messages, warnings from friends. "Leave now, while you still can." But he looked at the 100 children sheltering in the monastery, at the elderly who had nowhere else to go, and knew he could not abandon them. On May 21st, 3 masked gunmen burst through the monastery gates at 2:30 in the afternoon. They took his laptop, his car keys, his freedom. They beat him, blindfolded him, bound his hands with rope that cut into his wrists. A deacon named Boutros was taken with him, thrown into the back of a vehicle that sped into the desert heat. For 4 days, they kept him locked in a car in the mountains, the temperature inside reaching unbearable heights. His body cramping, his mind beginning to fragment from thirst and fear. Then they moved him to Rokkotha, capital of their caliphate, and locked him in that bathroom prison, where only a skylight reminded him that the sun still rose and set in God's world. The interrogations began immediately. Daily visits from men whose faces remained hidden behind scarves, their voices harsh with certainty. "Who are you?" they demanded. "I am a Nazarene, a Christian," he answered. "Then you are an infidel, and we will cut your throat unless you convert." The threats became routine, a liturgy of violence repeated until the words lost their edge. But on the 23rd day, the threats became reality. They burst in without warning. A group of men with a whip fashioned from garden hose and rope. Father Jacques was pulled to his feet, his shirt torn away, his arms held by rough hands. 30 minutes of flagellation followed, each strike a line of fire across his back and shoulders. But even as his body screamed in pain, his mind found an unexpected clarity. He was sharing in Christ's suffering, walking a Via Dolorosa through this desert prison. "I forgive you," he whispered as the blows fell. "I forgive you, even now." And in that moment of physical agony, he experienced a peace so profound it defied all logic. He saw Jesus flagellated before crucifixion, and understood that he was not alone in his suffering. That grace could enter even here, even now, even through the stripes on his back that would scar him forever. The next day brought a different terror. A man entered with a knife, its blade catching what little light filtered into the cell. He grabbed Father Jacques roughly, pressed the cold metal against his throat, and began to count aloud. 1, 2, 3. The priest felt every nerve in his body screaming for escape, felt the primal fear of death rising in his chest. But somewhere deeper, beneath the fear, he felt the prayers of thousands of friends in Syria, brothers and sisters in monasteries around the world. People he'd never met who were interceding for him at this very moment. "Lord, have mercy on me." He cried out, not a performance, but a genuine plea torn from his depths. At the count of 10, the man's hand faltered. The knife withdrew. The jihadist fled the room as if pursued by something he couldn't name. Father Jacques collapsed against the wall, trembling, alive. Later, much later, he would tell others that he believed God intervened in that man's heart, that his cry reminded the would-be executioner of God's existence. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. The bathroom became his desert, his retreat, his unwanted monastery. He prayed the rosary using his fingers when they took his beads, inventing new forms of prayer in the darkness. He sang old hymns, remembered from childhood melodies, by Fairouz that spoke of suffering carved in the twilight. Every pain, every fear dissolved when he prayed to Our Lady, replaced by a calm that his captors found infuriating. They wanted to see him broken, but instead he smiled not from bravado but from genuine peace. From the knowledge that they could imprison his body but never his soul. This smile, this inexplicable joy in captivity, confused them. How can a prisoner smile? They asked each other, unnerved by what they couldn't understand. Then, 3 months into his captivity, came the reunion that broke his heart anew. A Saudi sheikh entered his cell. "Are you Baba Jacques? Come. The Christians from Qaryatayn have been bothering us about you." Father Jacques thought he was being taken to his execution. Instead, after a 4-hour drive through the desert, an iron gate opened to reveal 250 of his parishioners, Christians he'd warned to flee, people he thought were safe. The joy and pain of that moment collided in his chest like thunder. They thought him dead, he thought them free. Now all were prisoners together. They were eventually returned to Qaryatayn, technically free, but trapped under ISIS rule, forced to sign documents accepting jizya tax and severe restrictions, but they could celebrate Mass again, could receive communion. Father Jacques saw this as an unexpected miracle, a gift of mercy in the midst of hell. One day in late August, as he prepared for Sunday Mass in a basement chapel, praying by candlelight, with his people gathered close, Father Jacques had a conversation that would change everything. A young Muslim man approached him quietly after the service, someone he knew from the years of charitable work. "Baba Jacques," the man whispered, "we are going to get you out. Not just you, as many as we can save." The planning was dangerous. ISIS had made it a capital offense for Muslims to help Christians, but this man and about 15 others had decided that their Christian neighbors' lives mattered more than their own safety. "You helped us when we had nothing," the man said simply. "Now it's our turn." They were going to dress the Christian girls in black abiyas and smuggle them through checkpoints, claiming them as wives or sisters, and they were going to get Father Jacques out on a motorcycle. October 10, 2015, dawned like any other day in captivity, hot, uncertain, heavy with unspoken dread. But that evening, as the desert sun began its descent toward the horizon, Father Jacques was handed a black robe and a disguise. A motorcycle engine growled outside. His Muslim friend's face was set with determination and fear in equal measure. "Put your arms around me and hold on," the man said. "If they ask, your name is Ahmad Abdullah." They roared out of Qaryatayn into the desert, the wind-whipping Father Jacques robes, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. Then ahead an ISIS checkpoint, armed men flagging them down. The motorcycle slowed. "Where are you going?" a jihadist demanded. Father Jacques' friend answered calmly while the priest pressed his face against the driver's back, praying silently. "And him?" The guard gestured at Father Jacques. "Ahmad Abdullah," his friend said without hesitation. A pause that stretched like eternity. Then the guard waved them through. They drove for miles across the open desert. The monastery of Mar Elian and the town of Qaryatayn shrinking behind them until they were just memories on the horizon. When they finally reached government-controlled territory near Homs, Father Jacques climbed off the motorcycle, his legs shaking, his heart overflowing with gratitude and disbelief. He was free, but his thoughts immediately turned to those still captive as children. The elderly, the women still trapped under ISIS rule. His Muslim friends didn't stop with his rescue. Over the next several days, they organized escapes for 58 more Christians. Each one a miracle of courage and compassion. Later, when people asked Father Jacques how Muslims could risk their lives for Christians, he would recall what his rescuer had told him. "Because you are our family." This simple statement contained everything 14 centuries of living side by side, of shared suffering and shared hope, of refusing to let ideology destroy ancient bonds of neighborliness. The world wanted to know his story, wanted to understand how a man who'd been tortured could speak without bitterness. Father Jacques found himself in Rome, in Paris, in monasteries across Europe and the Middle East, telling and retelling what happened in that desert prison. "I still feel for my captors the same feeling I had when I was their prisoner. Compassion," he would say, watching people's faces contort in confusion. How could he feel compassion for men who'd beaten him, threatened him, held a knife to his throat? He tried to explain about seeing through God's eyes, about recognizing that even jihadists are human beings, trapped in their own prisons of ideology and violence. Behind Or inside them, what is there? He asked. They are someone's sons, someone's brothers. They are people whom God loves, despite everything. His testimony spread across the Christian communities of the Middle East, offering hope to those who wondered if faith could survive such darkness. Churches invited him to speak. Journalists came with recorders and cameras. But Father Jacques was most comfortable in quiet moments, celebrating Mass for refugees in Kurdistan, where he'd relocated, chopping onions in monastery kitchens, teaching young nuns how to pray the liturgy in Arabic. He wrote a book with journalist Amaury Guillaume, a monk held hostage, a jihadist prisoner's struggle for peace, but even that felt too dramatic to him. What happened in Raqqa wasn't drama. It was simply the gospel lived under extreme circumstances. Bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you, Jesus had said. Father Jacques discovered that these weren't just beautiful words but actual instructions for survival. The physical scars remained. He walked with a cane now, moved slowly, his body bearing witness to what the Spirit had endured. But when people asked if his ordeal had shaken his faith, he seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. If anything, captivity had strengthened it. God gave me the gift of a smile, he said, something that put my jailers in difficulty. I cannot explain where I got the strength. He knew, though, it came from the prayers of thousands he never met, from the rosaries prayed by nuns in cloisters and grandmothers in villages, from the communion of saints that transcended prison walls. It came from recognizing Christ in the flagellation, from seeing God's image even in the man who'd whipped him. It came from choosing, moment by moment, hour by hour, day by day, to forgive rather than hate. And in that choice, he discovered freedom. In January 2023, nearly 8 years after his kidnapping, Pope Francis confirmed Father Jacques Mourad as Archbishop of Homs, the Syrian Catholic archdiocese that encompassed his beloved desert where war had raged for more than a decade. At his consecration on March 3, 2023, cardinals and patriarchs gathered in Homs' Holy Spirit Cathedral, a building that had survived bombing and occupation, to witness this man of forgiveness take up the shepherd's staff. The ceremony itself was testimony. Christians and Muslims together, Syrian Orthodox and Syrian Catholic and Melkite Greek Catholic standing shoulder to shoulder. Proof that the bonds ISIS tried to sever could not be permanently broken. Archbishop Mourad, now taking the name Julian Jacob, spoke of continuing Father Paolo Dalloglio's work of dialogue, of refusing to give up on the possibility of peace. He spoke of rebuilding not just the destroyed monastery of Mar Elian, but the trust between communities that war had fractured. The challenges remain immense. Syria is a broken country, its Christian population reduced by 3/4 from what it was before the war. The Islamic State may have been driven from its territorial caliphate, but the ideology persists, and violence continues to flare across the region. Archbishop Mourad speaks honestly about these difficulties, about official Muslim authorities who still refuse genuine dialogue, who view Christians as guests rather than citizens. But he also insists on the importance of continuing to reach out, to trust, to build bridges. We cannot win the war through reasons, he says, but we can stop the war by opening our hearts. This is not naivete, but hard-won wisdom, bought with scars and prayers and 5 months in a bathroom prison where he learned that forgiveness is stronger than fear. He has received awards, now the prestigious St. John Paul II Award for interreligious dialogue, but these recognitions seem almost beside the point. The real testimony is simpler. A man who chose love over hate, who blessed his enemies even as they beat him, who escaped death not just physically but spiritually by refusing to let violence turn him into someone who could hate. When Archbishop Mourad returned to Qatar years later to begin restoration work on the monastery of Mar Elian that ISIS had demolished, he found only rubble and memories. The walls where children once played, the chapel where he'd celebrated Mass, the courtyard where Muslims and Christians had shared meals, all reduced to broken stone and twisted metal. Yet standing there amid the ruins, he felt not despair but determination. Stones can be rebuilt, he thought. What matters more is whether hearts can be rebuilt too. whether the bridges between people can be restored alongside the bridges between buildings. He began the work, not just of physical reconstruction, but of the harder labor of reconciliation, of showing by example that a man who'd suffered at the hands of extremism could still believe in Islam's essential goodness, could still call Muslims family. The motorcycle ride through the desert on that October evening in 2015 had lasted only hours, but its meaning continues to reverberate through every conversation about faith and violence, forgiveness and justice, fear and courage. That Muslim friend who risked everything had no political agenda, no religious obligation to save a Christian priest. He did it because Jacques was his neighbor, his friend, someone who'd helped his community when they needed water and food and hope. This is the story that refuses to fit neatly into our narratives about religious war, about Christian-Muslim conflict, about the inevitable clash of civilizations. It insists instead on the stubborn persistence of human decency, on the way love can survive even in darkness, on the truth that we are all more than our worst moments or our worst ideologies. When the ISIS checkpoint guard waved them through, he didn't know he was letting freedom escape his grasp. He thought he was just waving through two Muslim men on a routine errand. But freedom, Archbishop Mourad learned, wears many disguises. Today, as Syrian Christians continue their uncertain existence in a changed Middle East, Archbishop Mourad's voice remains one of the most compelling, not because he offers easy answers or simple solutions, but because he speaks from a depth of experience that commands attention. He knows what it means to face death and choose life, to face hatred and choose love, to face violence and choose peace. Young people come to him, asking how to keep faith when everything around them is falling apart. He tells them about the bathroom prison in Raqqa, about the moment the knife pressed against his throat, about the choice he made to forgive his would-be executioner even before the blade withdrew. Forgiveness is not something we do after we feel better, he tells them, it's what we do in order to become free. It's not weakness, but the greatest power we possess. This is the heart of his testimony, repeated in 100 different ways to 1,000 different audiences, that spiritual freedom and physical freedom are not the same thing, that a man can be imprisoned and still be more free than his captors. That grace enters even the darkest places if we open the door. His story challenges everything we think we know about justice and mercy, about how victims should respond to their victimizers, about what it means to forgive the unforgivable. Western audiences especially struggle with his compassion for ISIS militants, his insistence on seeing God's image even in the men who beat him. Surely some people deserve our hatred, our vengeance, our eternal condemnation. But Archbishop Mourad gently insists otherwise. If I had chosen to hate them, I would have become their prisoner forever, he explains. By choosing to forgive them, even while they were hurting me, I remained free. They had my body, but they could not have my soul. This is what Jesus meant when he said to love our enemies. He was not asking us to feel warm feelings toward those who hurt us. He was teaching us the secret of spiritual liberation. In this understanding, forgiveness is not primarily about the perpetrator at all. It's about refusing to let evil transform the victim into someone who can hate. It's about maintaining first own humanity in the face of inhumanity. The question people most often ask him is how he prayed for his captors when they were actively torturing him. Wasn't that impossible? Wasn't that asking too much? Archbishop Mourad pauses when he hears this question, searching for words to describe something that transcends explanation. When they were whipping me, he says finally, I saw Jesus being flagellated before his crucifixion. And I thought, with your pains, O Jesus, I offer this suffering. Not because I deserved to share in Christ's passion, I don't, but because God gave me that grace in that moment. And if Jesus could pray, Father, forgive them while they were nailing him to the cross, who am I to refuse to forgive while they're whipping me? This is not piety or pretense, but honest description of mystical experience, of the way suffering can become sacramental if we let it, of the way God can meet us in our worst moments and transform them into something redemptive. The Church has long taught that martyrdom is the supreme witness to faith. the ultimate testimony of love. Archbishop Mourad came close to that witness, but was granted a different grace. Not the crown of martyrdom, but the harder path of living martyrdom. Of bearing witness, not through a single moment of heroic death, but through years of patient reconciliation. His Muslim rescuer displayed this same living martyrdom, risking execution to save his Christian neighbor. The teenage Muslims who smuggled Christian girls through ISIS checkpoints, the Muslim families who brought food to returning Christians despite the danger, all of them showed that martyrdom is not always about dying for faith, but sometimes about living dangerously for love. These stories of courage and compassion didn't make international headlines the way the beheading videos did, but they are the stories that offer hope, that remind us why the darkness can never fully overcome the light. As Syria tentatively rebuilds, as the guns slowly fall silent and displaced families begin the painful journey home, Archbishop Mourad remains a sign of contradiction. He refuses to divide the world into simple categories of good and evil, Christian and Muslim, victim and perpetrator. He insists instead on the messy complexity of human beings who are capable of both tremendous cruelty and breathtaking kindness. Sometimes in the same person, sometimes on the same day. Who are these people from ISIS? He asks. Everyone knows they are terrorists and criminals. True. But behind or inside them, what is there? What kind of people are they really? He believes that trusting others, even the dangerous, even the violent, is essential to building bridges toward peace. Not naive trust that ignores danger, but the deeper trust that refuses to reduce human beings to their worst actions. That maintains hope even when hope seems foolish. The final chapter of Archbishop Mourad's story has not yet been written, for he continues his work in a Middle East still racked by violence and uncertainty. But perhaps that's fitting. His testimony is not meant to be a neat conclusion, a satisfying ending where good triumphs completely and evil is utterly vanquished. It's meant to be an ongoing witness to the possibility of choosing love in impossible circumstances, of maintaining hope in the valley of shadows, of believing that reconciliation remains possible even after unspeakable violence. When he celebrates Mass now in the Cathedral of Homs, the Eucharist takes on particular power. This is a man who knows what it means to hunger for the bread of life, who celebrated Mass in basements under ISIS rule, who counts it an unimaginable gift to hold the consecrated host once more. Every "This is my body, broken for you," echoes with lived experience. Every "This is my blood, poured out for you" resonates with the blood of martyrs and near martyrs, with sacrifice and salvation intertwined, as they always are in Christian mystery. This account draws from verified reporting by Vatican News, Catholic News Agency, the National Catholic Register, America Magazine, Aleteia Asia News, Aid to the Church in Need, and numerous other Catholic and Middle Eastern news outlets that documented Father Jacques Mourad's kidnapping by ISIS in May 2015, his 5 months in captivity including torture and mock executions, his miraculous escape on October 10, 2015 with the help of Muslim neighbors, and his subsequent appointment as Archbishop of Homs in 2023. His testimony of forgiveness toward his captors, documented in his book A Monk Held Hostage and in multiple interviews, has become one of the most powerful witnesses to Christian faith in the modern Middle East, demonstrating that love remains stronger than hatred even in the darkest circumstances. The story of his Muslim rescuers who risked their lives reminds the world that courage and compassion transcend religious boundaries, and that the bonds of neighborliness, carefully built over years of service and mutual respect, can survive even the storm of extremist violence.